Have you ever found yourself making like a snap judgment? Felt instantly right, maybe, but then later you thought, maybe that was a bit flawed.
Oh, absolutely. Or, the opposite, wrestling with some really complex problem, just meticulously thinking through every single step.
Yeah, it feels like our minds work on these two totally different tracks sometimes.
They really do.
Yeah.
And that dynamic, that interplay, it shapes, well, pretty much everything. Our judgments, the decisions we make, how we even experience life.
Right. So today we're doing a deep dive into exactly that. We're looking at how our minds work, drawing a lot from Daniel Kahneman's big book, Thinking Fast and Slow.
The truly foundational work.
Definitely. And many of you listening probably know the basics, System 1, System 2. But our mission today is to really unpack them, not just what they are, but how they interact, how they work together, or sometimes how they really don't.
And how that collaboration, or lack thereof, leads to some, well, surprising outcomes. Kahneman and Tversky, his collaborator, they really showed us how our intuition isn't always as rational as we like to think.
Yeah, those hidden forces behind our own thinking. Okay, so let's get into it. These two systems. Let's start with the first one, System 1. What exactly is that?
Okay, System 1, think of it as your fast mind. It's automatic, it's effortless, often very emotional. It's always on,
Yeah.
running in the background.
Making quick connections, giving you impressions.
Exactly, without you consciously trying. It handles things we're born with, perceiving the world, orienting to a sound, avoiding danger, that fear of spiders, maybe.
Innate stuff.
Right. But also skills that become automatic through tons of practice.
Like reading. Once you know how, it just happens.
Precisely. Reading, understanding nuances in conversation, or even like an expert chess player, seeing a strong move almost instantly.
Ah, that expert intuition.
Yeah, Herbert Simon called it recognition. He said intuition is nothing more, nothing less than recognition. System 1 is constantly generating suggestions for us, impressions, intuitions, feelings.
Like when you just know someone's angry from the first word they say on the phone.
That's it. Or walking into a room and sensing you were just being talked about. That's pure System 1.
Okay, so that's the fast, automatic pilot. What about the other mode, System 2?
Right, System 2. That's the slow, deliberate mind. This is where the effort comes in. Logic, concentration, self-control. It's what you consciously engage.
So doing math in your head, like 17 times 24?
Exactly. That takes work. Or trying to recall your phone number or your partner's birthday. You have to consciously search your memory.
It's the part that has to actively try.
And it can actually direct System 1. You can tell yourself, okay, look for a woman with white hair in this crowd. System 2 sets the task.
And System 1 does the scanning.
Right. Or consciously remembering to drive on the left if you're visiting the UK or Australia. That requires overriding your automatic System 1 habit. That's System 2, exerting control, putting in real mental effort.
Sounds powerful, but you said effortful. Does it have limits? It can't just run full throttle all the time, can it?
That's a critical point. Yes, it has very real limits. System 2's capacity is finite. It gets tired, basically.
Like a muscle.
Sort of, yeah. If you try to do too many effortful things at once, performance drops. Your attention is divided, and that resource is limited.
Explains why trying to have a serious conversation while navigating complex traffic is, well, not a great idea.
Definitely not. You're splitting a very limited attentional budget.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. They aren't separate switches, right? They're both on when we're awake. How do they actually, work together day to day?
That interaction is key. So, System 1 is always running, churning out those quick suggestions, feelings, intuitions. System 2 is usually, well, kind of idling in the background.
Just coasting?
Pretty much. In its low-effort mode, it often just accepts or endorses System 1's suggestions without much, if any, modification. You generally trust your impressions, act on your desires, and honestly, most of the time, that works fine.
So System 2 is like a supervisor who mostly trusts the employee, System 1, to get things right. When does it actually step in and take charge?
It kicks in when System 1 runs into trouble. When something surprising happens, or there's a conflict, or a task clearly needs sustained mental effort.
Like if you hear something that doesn't quite make sense.
Exactly. The example Kahneman uses is, a chicken has 4 legs. System 1 immediately flags that as weird, likely false.
Right. Chickens have 2 legs.
But System 2 might then engage just a bit more. You might briefly check related facts like, okay, other animals have 4 legs. Stores sell chicken legs, often in packs of 4. It confirms the initial false verdict, but resolves that slight flicker of conflict.
So it engages when System 1 is like, Boss, need a little help here.
That's a good way to put it. But, and this is important, System 2 is inherently, well, lazy.
Lazy.
Or maybe effort averse is fairer. It prefers to conserve mental energy. So it often just rubber stamps System 1's output without doing a thorough check, especially if the answer seems plausible.
And that's where the trouble starts, the biases and mistakes.
That's precisely where many of them creep in. If System 1 serves up an easy, intuitive answer, System 2 often doesn't bother questioning it deeply. It takes the path of least resistance.
So if System 2 is tired or overloaded, cognitive load they call it, does that make us more likely to rely on those potentially flawed System 1 impulses?
It absolutely does. When System 2 is busy, maybe you're trying to remember a phone number or dealing with a stressful situation, its control weakens.
And we get more impulsive?
Studies show exactly that. People under cognitive load make more selfish choices, use stereotypes more readily, make more superficial judgments. Just holding digits in your mind can make you more likely to choose chocolate cake over fruit salad.
Wow. Okay, and it's not just mental tasks, right? This idea of ego depletion.
Yeah.
Resisting temptation or controlling emotions also uses up that System 2 energy.
Yes, that's Roy Baumeister's big contribution. He showed that all kinds of voluntary effort, cognitive, emotional control, even physical endurance, seem to draw on a single limited pool of mental energy.
So if I force myself not to eat the cookies,
You might find it harder to focus on a difficult puzzle afterwards. Or you might give up sooner on a task requiring physical stamina, like holding a hand grip.
it's all connected. And the glucose thing is fascinating too. Mental effort actually burns blood sugar.
Apparently so. Low blood glucose levels correlate with weakened self-control, with ego depletion. And, amazingly, giving people a sugary drink can actually counteract some of those effects, temporarily restoring self-control.
So mental energy isn't just a metaphor, it's tied to our physiology.
It really underscores that connection. Our willpower, our ability for careful thought, it's a finite resource. It can literally be depleted and, to some extent, replenished.
Okay, so we have these interacting systems. System 2 can be lazy or tired. This sets the stage perfectly for illusions and biases. Let's talk about some classics. The molar liar illusion. The lines with the fins.
Ah, yes, the perfect example of System 1's autonomy. You know, the two lines are the same length. You can measure them.
Right. System 2 knows the fact.
But System 1, your perceptual system, insists on seeing them as different lengths because of those inward and outward pointing fins. You can't not see the illusion, even knowing the truth.
So your impression clashes with your belief.
Exactly. It perfectly shows the difference. And it teaches us humility. Just knowing something intellectually doesn't mean our intuitive perception changes. We can still be fooled by our own minds.
Which is crucial when we think about other biases that aren't just visual. Like the law of small numbers sounds technical, but it's about jumping to conclusions.
Very much. System 1 loves coherence. It loves stories. It tends to treat small samples as if they're just as representative as large ones. It exaggerates consistency.
Making reality seem tidier than it is.
Right, like that study on kidney cancer rates. The counties with the lowest rates were mostly rural, sparsely populated.
So fresh air and country living prevents cancer.
That was the intuitive System 1 conclusion. But the counties with the highest rates were also mostly rural and sparsely populated. The real reason. Small samples just produce more extreme results, high and low, purely by chance. It's statistics, not lifestyle.
Like flipping a coin only 4 times, you might easily get all heads or all tails, but flip it 1,000 times and it'll be much closer to 50-50.
Precisely. Or the Israeli Air Force example, where one squadron losing 4 planes and another losing none was initially seen as needing a deep investigation into pilot skill or tactics.
When it was probably just luck.
Most likely, yes. Blind luck. System 1 hates randomness. It demands a cause. The lesson is, be very wary of drawing strong conclusions from small amounts of data. Watch out for that illusion of pattern.
Okay, so our minds grab onto causes, even spurious ones. How does that play into things like the anchoring effect, when an initial number influences us?
Hugely. An anchor is just some initial value, even a completely random one, that pulls our subsequent judgments towards it. The classic experiment involved spinning a wheel of fortune.
Rigged to land on either 10 or 65.
Right. Then people were asked to estimate the percentage of African nations in the UN. Those who saw the wheel on 10-day guessed around 25% on average. Those who saw 65, they guessed around 45%.
Wow, that's a huge difference, pulled by a meaningless number.
It's incredibly powerful and works everywhere. The asking price for a house anchors the negotiation. The suggested donation amount influences what you give.
Can System 2 fight back against anchors?
It can try. Conscious effort helps. If you suspect an anchor is in play, like in a negotiation, deliberately thinking the opposite helps. Actively search for reasons why the anchor might be wrong, why the true value could be much higher or lower.
Force system 2 to generate counterarguments.
Exactly. Don't just adjust from the anchor, challenge it directly.
Okay, what about the availability heuristic, judging things based on how easily examples come to mind?
That's it. If I ask you to list 6 times you've been assertive, it's probably fairly easy.
Yeah, I could probably do that.
Okay, but what if I asked you to list 12 times? That gets much harder.
Right, I'd struggle after a while.
And because retrieving examples becomes difficult, people often conclude, maybe I'm not that assertive after all. They judge themselves based on the ease or difficulty of recall.
So it's not just the number of examples, but the feeling of ease.
Often, yes, especially if the difficulty is unexpected. System 1 handles the retrieval, but System 2 makes an inference from how smoothly or not smoothly that retrieval goes. It's interpreting the feeling of availability.
Interesting. And that links to representativeness, right? Judging likelihood based on stereotypes and
Yeah.
this idea of substitution.
Yes, substitution is a core System 1 trick. When faced with a hard question, the target question, System 1 often swaps it for an easier one, the heuristic question, and answers that instead.
Like the Steve the librarian example. Is Steve, described as shy and detail-oriented, more likely to be a farmer or a librarian?
The hard question is about probability. There are way more farmers than librarians. But System 1 answers the easier question. How much does Steve resemble the stereotype of a librarian?
And because he fits the stereotype well?
We intuitively feel he's likely a librarian, ignoring the base rates. We substitute similarity for probability.
The Linda problem is the killer example here, isn't it? Linda, the philosophy major, concerned with social justice.
Right. Is she more likely to be a bank teller or a bank teller who is active in the feminist movement?
Logically, just bank teller has to be more probable because it includes feminist bank tellers and non-feminist ones. It's a bigger set.
But the description makes feminist bank tellers seem so much more representative of Linda. So System 1 screams feminist bank teller. It feels more coherent.
But you said System 2 can sometimes catch this.
Yes, crucially, if you present the options side by side and force a direct comparison, System 2 can engage. People with some statistical training are more likely to spot the logical error then. But System 1's intuitive answer is powerful.
This tendency to create coherent stories leads us straight into hindsight bias, doesn't it? Making the past seem inevitable.
Absolutely. After something happens, System 1 is brilliant at weaving the known facts into a tight, causal narrative. It makes events, like Google's success, seem completely predictable in retrospect.
Oh, of course they succeeded. They did X, Y, and Z, ignoring all the uncertainty and luck involved at the time.
Exactly. It creates an illusion of understanding. We think we understand the past far better than we actually do because the story feels so right now.
And this leads to overconfidence about the future and the illusion of skill.
Precisely. If the past seems predictable, we feel the future must be too. This fuels overconfidence in experts like stock pickers or political pundits operating in highly unpredictable domains. Their subjective confidence, that feeling of knowing.
That's often just System 1 feeling good about its story.
Largely, yes. It's based on the coherence of the story, not necessarily the evidence supporting it. And it leads us to unfairly blame decision makers when good decisions have bad outcomes. Because in hindsight, the risks seem obvious.
Like that Duluth flood monitor case. People judged the decision much more harshly after the flood happened.
Because the outcome changed the story. The key takeaway is, be deeply suspicious of hindsight. Outcomes often tell you more about luck than about the quality of the decision itself. And subjective confidence is a very unreliable signal of accuracy.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, but still related to how things appear to us. Framing effects. How the way information is presented changes our choices.
Hugely important. You can present the exact same objective information in different ways, different frames, and get drastically different reactions.
90% fat-free versus 10% fat. Same yogurt, totally different feeling.
Exactly. The fat-free frame feels positive. The 10% fat frame feels negative. System 1 reacts emotionally to the frame itself. Or medical treatments. 90% survival rate sounds way better than 10% mortality rate.
Even though they mean the exact same thing.
The frame triggers different emotional responses in System 1, and System 2 often just goes along with that initial feeling.
The organ donation example is so powerful too. Opt-in versus opt-out.
Massive differences in donation rates between countries, purely based on the default choice on the form. Is the default, you are a donor unless you opt out, or you are not a donor unless you opt in?
And people tend to just stick with the default.
Overwhelmingly so. The default feels like the normal, recommended option. Changing it requires effort, System 2, and feels like taking active responsibility. So inertia wins. System 1 prefers the default.
It really shows how our choices can be manipulated just by how things are presented, even something like the MPG illusion with cars.
Right, thinking in miles per gallon is intuitive, but can be misleading for fuel efficiency comparisons. Gallons per mile is actually more informative, but less intuitive. Framing matters for policy, for personal choices. It's everywhere.
The message is stark. Our preferences aren't always based on substance, but on the frame. Okay, let's cover one more major area, loss aversion and the endowment effect.
Fundamental biases. Loss aversion is the idea that losses loom larger than equivalent gains. The pain of losing $100 feels much stronger than the pleasure of gaining $100.
That asymmetry seems deep-seated. The cockroach in the cherries versus the cherry in the cockroaches.
Perfect illustration. Negatives just carry more weight. We work harder to avoid a loss than to achieve an equivalent gain. Think golfers putting for par versus putting for birdie.
They try harder to avoid the bogey, the loss.
Statistics show they actually putt better when trying to save par. Loss aversion focuses the mind.
And the endowment effect, valuing something more just because we own it?
Yes, it flows from loss aversion. Giving up something you own feels like a loss. Acquiring the same thing if you don't own it is seen as a gain. Since losses hurt more than gains feel good, owners demand a higher price to sell than buyers are willing to pay.
The coffee mug experiment. Sellers wanted twice what buyers offered for the same mug.
Classic finding. It makes negotiations tough because my concession, my loss, feels more painful to me than it feels beneficial, like a gain to you.
Creates an instant gap. Can System 2 help here? Can experienced people overcome this?
Yes, to some extent. Experienced traders, for instance, learn to adopt broad framing. They don't view each trade as an isolated gain or loss, but as part of a larger portfolio.
See the bigger picture.
Right. That deliberate System 2 perspective helps blunt the sharp emotional sting of individual losses, reducing loss aversion. It takes conscious effort and training.
Okay, now a final shift Kahneman makes. It's related, but different. Not System 1 versus System 2, but the two selves. The experiencing self and the remembering self. What's going on there?
This is a really profound idea. The experiencing self is you, living life moment by moment. It asks, how do I feel right now? The remembering self is the storyteller, the one who looks back, evaluates experiences, and makes decisions about the future. It asks, how was it overall?
And the remembering self isn't always accurate.
No, because memory formation, which is largely automatic, a System 1 function, follows its own quirky rules. Two big ones are the peak end rule and duration neglect.
Okay, break those down. Peak end.
Our memory of an experience, how we rate it overall, is heavily influenced by the most intense moment, the peak, and how it finished, the end.
And duration neglect.
We largely ignore how long the experience actually lasted. A short, intensely painful procedure might be remembered as worse than a longer one that was less intense overall, especially if the longer one ended on a slightly better note.
So a long, mostly pleasant vacation could be ruined in memory by a really bad final day.
Exactly. The remembering self gives disproportionate weight to the peak and the end, and doesn't properly account for all the good hours or days that came before.
And we make choices based on what the remembering self tells us.
We do. We choose based on anticipated memories, guided by the remembering self, even if it means choosing options that might involve more overall unpleasantness for our experiencing self. It's the remembering self that learns, plans, and decides.
That's quite something. Our future choices are hostage to our flawed memories. And this ties into the focusing illusion, too.
Yes. When we think about how much something affects our happiness, like climate, or money, or health, we tend to vastly overestimate its importance while we're thinking about it.
Focusing on it makes it seem bigger than it is in daily life.
Right. Californians aren't actually happier than people living elsewhere, despite the perceived better climate. When you ask people about climate, they focus on it and assume it matters more for overall well-being than it actually does day to day. Finding a dime might make you report being happier overall in that moment because you're focused on that small, positive event. Nothing is as important as you think it is while you were thinking about it.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, we've journeyed through System 1's fast intuitions and System 2's slow deliberations, their constant interaction.
And how that interplay, along with System 2's laziness and limits, opens the door to all these predictable biases and illusions we've discussed, from anchoring to framing to loss aversion.
And understanding this isn't really about becoming perfectly rational robots, is it?
Not at all. That's probably impossible and maybe not even desirable. It's more about gaining awareness, recognizing the situations where our intuition is likely to lead us astray.
Equipping ourselves to pause, to maybe engage system 2 a bit more deliberately when the stakes are high or when we recognize a pattern of potential error.
Exactly. It's about knowing the quirks of your own mental machinery.
So maybe the provocative thought to leave everyone with is this. The next time you have that strong gut feeling, that immediate certainty, just pause for a second. Ask yourself, is this system 1 jumping to a conclusion? Or has system 2 really had a fair look?
And maybe also ask, how is my remembering self likely to spin this later on?
Food for thought. Keep exploring how your own mind works. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.